Hi, everyone. Good evening. This is Evoke Therapy Program's broadcast on trust, permission, forgiveness, and forgetting. My name is Dr. Brad Reedy. I'm the clinical director at Evoke Therapy Programs, and it is Thursday, February 21st, 2019. So this is a broadcast that I really like because it's at the heart of many questions that parents ask as they go through this process. And like almost all of my topics, while I'm talking about these in the context of parenting, they have application to all of our relationships, right? The where do we trust? How much do we trust? What is it? And like most of my broadcasts, most of my thinking on this is not intuitive. Most of it is counterintuitive or uncommon sense. And I've developed it from working with adolescents and young adults with mental health and addiction issues. And so what they're asking for is kind of a something that requires uncommon thinking, right? That's what their behavior is telling us. They're saying, this isn't working for me, and I need something else or something different or something more. So I'll start off with trust. There's this false dichotomy of about trust that is, you know, is trust earned? And of course, we can do some things to earn people's trust. Or is it a gift that I give to you, right? It's something that I bestow upon you. It's mine to give, mine to gift to you. The fact of the matter is we can all imagine situations where somebody has done enough to be trusted and they're still not trusted, right? You can imagine that. That's not impossible to imagine. And a lot of that's going to have to do with background and history. It might have nothing to do with the current situation, but if you've been betrayed over and over again, if you have trust issues, if you're very anxious, if you're extraordinarily protective of your heart and of getting hurt, it's going to be harder for you to trust. And we can also imagine that some people give trust in cases where it's quite unwise, right? There's a lot of evidence to suggest that they probably shouldn't trust this person. So instead of thinking about is it a gift, is it earned, and we can debate that all day long. Your children do debate this with you all day long. And what I say to the kids is I say, how about you just do what you do, and then I'll decide to trust you when I'm ready to trust you. How about you do what you do without trying to earn my trust, but rather you do what you do because it's honest. Like the minute that I feel that you're trying to get something from me, even trust, then I don't trust you, right? It's for the effect. I remember I had one boy who lied about something in his first letter from his parents. He admitted to something that later we found out he didn't do. His parents accused him of stealing something because he had stolen lots and lots of things. So they accused him of stealing this really valuable item. It was a piece of jewelry. And the parents said, we've gone through this before. And so they wrote in the letter and they said, you say you didn't steal it and we believe you did. And during that first group, he admitted to it. He even had a reason. He said, I sold it. I bought something for my girlfriend and I just want to come clean. And so we all said, good job. Thanks for telling us. And then 2 weeks later, the mother said, I found it. It had fallen behind my dresser and I found it on the ground. And I said, and then they said, we feel horrible. And I said, well, wait just a second. Has your son stolen from you a lot? You were probably wise not to trust him, right? That was probably he kind of put out there something that it makes sense that you wouldn't trust him. That's not a crazy thought. And then I went back to the boy and I said, why did you lie? He said, I just wanted everybody to trust me. And I thought, this is amazing. He's actually lying so that we'll trust him. So we show up and we tell the truth not to get trust, although that tends to follow, but we do it because it's the right thing to do. It's the authentic, courageous, honest thing to do. That's why we do it. And so I think about it differently. I think about it in terms of ownership. I own whether I trust you or not. And trust is something that I choose to give or not. Right? I don't have this debate about whether or not you've earned it or not. And I've heard parents and children argue about that for decades. Right? The child thinks they've done enough, they've done enough repair work, they've been doing it long enough that why don't you trust me? And I say it doesn't work like that. They get to trust you when they're ready to trust you. Now, You ideally you do your work with a therapist, with a parent coach, with your evoke therapist, with whomever you're working with, to see if there's something else going on, to see if you have, if it's not about the child, if it's about some other wound, if it's about, like I said, if you get to the point where you've committed to yourself that you'll never let yourself be hurt again, then we'll talk about that as its own issue. But you get to choose when you give it or not. And having a debate about whether or not the child has reached some objective, or anybody in that for that matter, that the person has reached some objective level whereby they are now entitled to your trust, doesn't make sense. It's really not how it works. But we talk about it that way because, like I always say, we all grew up thinking we had to be right, instead of growing up realizing that the real job was to just be a self, a person. Parents worry about this kind of cause and effect. Will my lack of trust make them feel a certain thing horrible about themselves, disappointed? Let me tell you, when someone becomes accountable, when somebody is really doing their work, is really honest with themselves, when somebody has surrendered, right? We talk about that in therapy and addiction work, surrender. They get it. I don't blame you. I don't blame you that you don't trust me. Makes sense. I've lied to you before. You when you're the person that's done the hurting, right? When you're the person who's the offender in the story, forgiveness comes on the terms of the offended, not on the terms of the offender. And when somebody gets entitled and impatient with the timeline of being forgiven and being trusted, that's probably their issue, right? That they're probably not being honest with themselves. Even if you're lagging behind. I always say to parents, I think it's wise for your trust to lag behind the child's performance, right? And just let them deal with the consequences. And I think that a person's patience with somebody not forgiving or not trusting them is one of the indicators of how honest they're being and authentic they're being, and how much progress they've made. I've seen it over and over again, that the ones who have really surrendered don't become demanding, don't become impatient, and just accept it. And the ones who don't say things like, "You're making me feel horrible," or "Why are you making me feel so bad?" Are you being too cynical or too Pollyannish? That's the question. And too optimistic, too pessimistic. That's where you do your work. That's where you explore what's going on for you. When you come to me and say, "Am I trusting too much or too little?" I encourage you just to take a step back in general and just take a kind of a we'll see attitude. I can't tell you if you should let go of it or not. It's not mine to tell you. You get to decide, and if you want to, we can have a discussion and explore it. But most often, I'm going to choose to support you just kind of being unsure and give you permission, empower you to feel what you feel, and we can explore it. They, of course, can use this to manipulate, right? They'll point the proverbial metaphorical gun at our heads and say, if you don't say or think a certain way, I'm going to feel horrible. And we teach them. We teach them where our vulnerabilities, where our personal Achilles heel is. If we need to be fair, then they accuse us of not being fair. If our greatest value is being a loving parent, then they'll tell us that we're not loving. If it's really, really important to us because most likely we were wounded in this way, that they be heard, then they're going to tell us we're not listening. So that's why you do your work, so that you get more and more and more clear about that. Like I said, these things come on the timeline of the person who's been hurt, and authentic accountability waits for that, has empathy for that, which, by the way, actually leads you to trust them more than when they have an agenda, when they're trying to sell you something. I always think about that. If I feel in an interaction like somebody's trying to sell me something, I immediately take a step back and say something doesn't feel right here. But when somebody just lays it on the table and doesn't try to control what I think and feel, I tend to have more trust for them. Permission. Can I go to the concert? Can I come home? Will you let me have this privilege? Can I have a cell phone? Can I have a car? So forth and so on. A few things about this is, let's start off with valuing the struggle and the mistakes. I wouldn't say that this is number one, but it's in the top 10, maybe top 5 even. One of the things I teach parents all the time is to put more value in mistakes. Lean into them, their mistakes, their miscues, their flare-ups, their setbacks. If we hold on to it too tightly and growth and perfection is the standard, then it's going to be pretty hard. They'd rather just burn the house down than deal with that pressure, because that's loaded with a lot of shame and fear. And learning to not take away a child's pain and struggle means that we have to go inward and heal whatever family of origin wound that we feel that we're trying to fix in them. That's the key. Think of your inner child. Think of the child inside of you. Think of going back and visiting that one and talking to it and listening to it. What did it feel? What did it experience? And then when you do that with yourself, then you can do that with your child too. Take a we'll see attitude. This react slowly and deliberately. This is not a sprint. Take your time. You don't have to rush to a conclusion. You don't have to determine if everything they say is honest and authentic. I was just telling somebody today, um, my best students, the ones that I would put in the top 5% of the kind of work that they did with me, my best, I think were about 80% honest. I think that's pretty good in 8 or 9 weeks, right? Most of them were somewhere between 60 and 80. But I learned a long time ago to not hold on to things too tightly, to let go, because I'd seen too much. I've seen kids authentically, deeply grieve and cry while they were talking to me, and later on to find out it wasn't a lie, it wasn't dishonest, it just wasn't as deep as they could go. So having a more realistic idea of what it means. There's a book called Nurture Shock, and one of the chapters is on lying. I did a broadcast, a podcast webinar on that. Take a look at that. Parents are some of the, when they do the research, parents are some of the lowest, when they score the lowest on their ability to determine whether or not a child is lying. So react slowly. Pay little attention to promises, apologies, or goals. You want them. You want to hear them. They know that consciously or unconsciously, so they give them. It's like an alcoholic. They talk about one day at a time. You ask an alcoholic in recovery, are you going to drink again? Think about that. Think about asking your child, are you going to use drugs again? The honest response is, not today. That's all you know. So I'm not going to do it today. So when I go to therapy, I don't promise things to my therapist. I don't apologize. I don't list my goals to her. She can't send me away to treatment. But again, the authentic sharing and experience. I always used to say to my students, I'm more impressed when you tell me your self-doubts, when you tell me what you're struggling with, how you're conflicted, how you don't know. That I believe. Because I've seen way too many people absolutely confident in what they're going to do. And circumstances and situations and stress and triggers and all the stuff comes. Life comes at them. And it's difficult to follow through on it. So don't pay a lot of attention to promises, apologies, or goals. Those things aren't, apologies can be a part of accountability, can be a part of empathy, but don't pay too much attention. Hold those things lightly. Reverse accountability is my idea of, I used to say to kids, I would ask them how much they thought I weighed. And that has varied widely over my career. And they would take a guess. They were usually kind to me and would guess several pounds lighter than I was. And then I would tell them. I would say, I weigh 230 pounds. And I'd say, guess how much I want to weigh? And they would take guesses like 180, 190, 200. And I said, no, I want to weigh 230. I know what the secret for me, I don't have a medical condition. I know what the secret for me in weighing less than this. It's exercise and a healthier diet. It's like saying I would do anything to play the guitar except for take lessons and practice. I would do anything to speak Spanish except for study it and practice. Reverse accountability is sitting where you're at and asking yourself, how did I get here? I must want this. I used to say to the kids, you're sitting in the dirt in southern Utah or Oregon in the middle of winter. Maybe you have some part in this. Instead of telling me you don't want to be here. Maybe ending up in a bad marriage, maybe in a bad relationship and a job you don't like. Maybe there's something about that that's yours. So it's just looking at where you're at and beginning to own the journey that it took, the decisions that were made to get there. You're not perfect, but you're in charge. You're at least responsible for decisions. So back to that idea, you don't have to be right. You can't be all the time anyway. You can just be you. And you're responsible for the decisions. The buck stops with you. Even if you decide to be democratic, that's still your choice. It's not what I would encourage most parents whose children's brains have not fully developed where they can anticipate consequences and think rationally. I think handing a democracy over to a half-brainer, as we affectionately call them in our family, turning over a democracy to somebody with half a brain is probably not the wisest choice, right? You can do it if you want. I always said to students who were asking for permission, and I taught this to parents, and I would say, if you can handle a yes, if you deserve, if you're mature enough for me to say yes, then you're mature enough for me to say no. Then you can handle it. And I don't want you to say that to your children, but you can keep that in the back of your mind. I wouldn't encourage you to test them that way, but no, if they're responsible, mature enough, far enough along to handle a yes, then they can handle a no. It's why I ended up talking about length of stay and aftercare in half of the sessions I ever did out in the wilderness, is because that's what they wanted to talk about. And I thought, we can talk about this. I'll still learn about you, everything I need to know about how this discussion goes. Setting the boundary of having your child at Evoke, of maintaining and holding that boundary, of keeping them here as long as you believe, based on what the therapist is telling you, it's the right length of stay is, or where they go next. Holding that boundary, how they respond to it is the measure of how they're doing. It's the same discussion you're going to have at home, no matter what their age, around all the boundaries. Give yourself permission to be you, to have an opinion, to make the decision. And you're going to have to do some battle with guilt. You know, I've said this in several different contexts lately, if I'm not battling guilt, I know I'm not doing good self-care and good boundaries. Because guilt is what stops me. Over and over and over again throughout the years, I've asked people, parents, who have said, I knew what the right thing to do was and I didn't do it. When they say that, I say, why? Why, if you knew it was true? I know the answer. But if you knew it was true, why didn't you do it? And they would say, I felt guilty. Guilt is different than shame. Not dramatically different, as a lot of psychologists will tell you. Guilt is feeling bad for what you do, and shame is feeling bad for who you are. That's what most people will say. And there's some truth. It's more of a continuum than that. And nobody talks about that. But guilt is the belief that if I hurt you, if I do something that hurts you, then I've done something wrong or bad, because that's what our parents taught us. That's how they told us, that's how they gave us guidance in life, is they told us how upset they were or happy they were. And we were supposed to use that as a measure of whether or not we were doing the right thing. That's insane. It's insane to think that how a parent feels is the direct measure of whether a child's doing the right thing or not, right? My mother wanted me to do a lot of different things in my life with my career, my relationships, her religion. That's that doesn't enter into the equation. I'm not going to live a life for her, right? I'm 50 years old. She's 80 years old now, so it's different, but not that different. It ought to inform me. I ought to ask questions about it, but I've learned that sometimes when I do the right thing, when I do the right thing for my children, in my marriage, in my friendships, when I do the right thing, I show up and I tell the truth. Sometimes it hurts people. So it's not a reliable measure of right and wrong. And battling guilt can be a really, really good sign that you're making progress and evolving. And it doesn't leave you amoral or hedonistic or selfish. It leads you to be more whole. And then you tend to rely on something else for right and wrong, and that's love and compassion. I don't not rob a liquor store because I'm going to get caught and because I feel guilty. I don't rob a liquor store because of love. Controlling is trying to convince the children or the other person that you are right and they are wrong. And explanations are often evidence of self-doubt. Justifying your decisions, explaining your decisions, lecturing about your decisions, right? Telling them why they can't and can't do it is not evidence of a strength. You can try it once, but rarely does a child say why, and you give a perfectly rational explanation of why, and they never say, you've made some really good points. Thanks for letting me know where you're coming from. I'll just sit with that. We know that doesn't happen. Forgiveness. Sometimes parents will tell me I'm getting angry. I'm still angry, or I'm getting angrier. That's okay. See, in my work, everybody gets to feel what they feel. The children get to feel what they feel. You get to feel what they feel. That's the pathway to healing. I was just explaining to my 11-year-old 2 days ago the idea that not feeling is not in all cases, because there's organic issues, there's genetics, but for the most part, by and large, not feeling is the cause of mental health and addiction issues. Feeling is the cure. So you feel it. And hopefully you can feel it in a safe place. Now, if you give all of that to your child, it doesn't necessarily work. So you give it to me, or you give it to your home therapist. So that when you show up to the child, you're there for them and not vice versa. And sometimes you're getting angry because they're telling you more things, or because you have the room to be angry, right? Because before you were managing a crisis and chaos and life-threatening, or at least quality of life-threatening behaviors. Should I get over it? When should I get over it? When you're ready, on your time, no rush. You get to decide. Healing is on your terms. Just do it with somebody else besides them, so you don't unload on them all the time. You don't teach them that it's their fault. You teach them it's your job. Your serenity, your peace of mind, that's your responsibility, not theirs. Just do that work with somebody. I do that work with my therapist. So in practice, I don't get it right all the time. I don't do it well all the time, but in practice, I do that work with my therapist every week. I went to therapy this morning. It's usually Friday morning, but she moved it to today. I do that so when I show up in my marriage, when I show up in parenting, I have more capacity because I've already vented and complained here and sorted it out, uncovered it and turned it over and looked at it. So that when I show up, I have a better chance at being able to show up for the people that I love and loving them. This is something I've found. It's really, really, really hard to not be angry and to forgive somebody when it's still happening. Okay? I hear this a lot. People describe a situation that's still toxic, that's still happening to them. and they say, I'm not letting go. It's hard. If you're getting beat up by somebody, emotionally, physically, metaphorically, it's hard to forgive them, right? It's a signal. The lack of forgiveness is a signal. The anger, the open wound is a signal to do something, to set a boundary. That's why you can't forgive. It's almost impossible to forgive it if it's still happening. But you own forgiveness just like you own trust. They're very closely related. You get to do it on your turn, and you're not right, and don't have a debate with them about whether or not they've earned your forgiveness. You just own it. It's mine to give. I'm not ready, and I don't have to justify it. In fact, I talked to this guy or this woman called my therapist, and they're okay with me taking as long as I need. They don't have an agenda, and so I'm going to keep talking to them until I'm ready. Listen to your evoke therapist to help you differentiate between your relationship with the child and others, including yourself in your life. In other words, so I've heard people saying my mother was an alcoholic, and so I have this deep wound, and so I see my mother in my son or my daughter, for example. And I say, well, that's a different project. That's eclipsing the relationship with your child. Or my ex-husband, he's just like my ex-husband, or she's just like my ex-wife. Well, that's a different problem. Now you're projecting onto your child other relationships. And that's not crazy. We all do it. And so work through that, so that the relationship with your son or your daughter is a relationship with your son or your daughter, not a relationship with somebody else. Some people say that they've never been angry. Um, Sometimes we don't have permission or space. Sometimes we learned in our family of origin that anger isn't okay. Again, another thing to explore with your therapist. I've gotten better in my life at going to the feeling beneath it, the primary emotion. We try to teach that to your children. Anger always covers up another emotion. Underneath it is, we call it a secondary emotion. Frustration, feelings like anger are secondary often, or almost always. And so what's underneath the anger? Well, it's hurt, it's sadness, it's grief, it's embarrassment, it's fear, it's pain. And so I do better now than I did 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, going to the primary emotion instead of stopping at angry and staying stuck in it. Do we use anger to punish people? Right? That's unfortunately, I wish I could sit here before you and say, I don't, but I do. I try not to, I aspire not to, but I do. We have to risk getting hurt again to forgive, right? That's the great risk. Something also comes with this transformation that I teach, which is, did they really do it to you? Or did they just do it to themselves? Of course, my children impact me, but I will tell you that the older I get, the less I think that the things that people do to me are about me. I'm better at that than I used to be. Not completed, but better at it. I'm better if somebody yells at me and calls me a name to realize it's not about me. And I don't say it's not about me. Well, actually, I do sometimes when I'm in a place where I can't listen. I said that to my wife. She was standing right there at my office door. She was upset with me about something. And I said, you're just feeling bad and inadequate right now, so you're making me the bad object. Just in case you're wondering, it didn't go well. She didn't de-escalate. It's really hard not to say that sometimes, but when we know it, and that comes from a place of strength and knowing that we're okay, we can hear other people. I talked about the idea of anger being the secondary emotion, and hurt, fear, sadness, embarrassment, pain, the more vulnerable emotions being the primary emotions. I saw a quote one time that said, anger is hurt's bodyguard. Right? It's what protects us. Signals for change. Anger and resentment is almost always, not always, but almost always in our lives and our relationships, a sign that we need to do better self-care. But instead of doing that, instead of anger making us more clear about ourselves, we usually think of it's making us more clear about what the other idiot is doing. But if you turn that inward, in the book The Dance of Anger by Harriet Lerner, she talks about that anger is only an effective tool if it leads us to be more clear about ourselves, not about other people. I remember a dad I was describing, I could tell he was really angry and hurt by his son, rightly so. His son had lied and hurt him several times. It makes sense to me. And at one point, he was talking about lecturing a letter that he wanted to write to his son. And I said, why don't you just talk about how you're feeling? And he said, I mentioned that, tell him about your anger. And he said, I'm not angry. It's just the way that it is. So he had no awareness that he was angry. There's a great line out of the book Letters of Juliet where she said, I never realized I was angry. I just thought the world was slightly out of balance, tilted in an unfair way. See, most people don't realize that they're angry and don't own it. They either deny it or they go around it. But to get through anger, you have to go into it and through it and feel it and own it to make it through the other side. We're motivated more by emotions that we know. And so the more and more we do this work and work out our emotions and process our emotions and take care of them, the more we're able to respond to relationship situations from a place of reason, a place of compassion, a place of courage, clarity, authenticity. Resentment and anger, it costs us, right? It hurts us. And sometimes we get stuck kind of spinning in the anger. And it's our responsibility. It's that old idea that resentment is a drug, a poison, that we give that we drink ourselves. We drink the poison ourselves and we expect somebody else to suffer. I don't forgive people for their sake. I forgive for my sake. And it's not some moral position I'm taking. It's part of my practice. And it doesn't rob me of my boundaries, right? I can forgive people that hurt me and still say, and you don't get to be in my life in this way or that way. Those aren't exclusive of each other. If forgiveness robs you of your boundaries, it's unnecessary. Should I forget it? Is it different to forget it than to forgive? You hear lots of things about that. It would be silly to forget things, to somebody that was an abusive alcoholic in your life, to forget that. It's okay to say, I don't want to be married to this anymore. You're beating the children, you're beating me up metaphorically or literally. And so I forgive you, I have compassion, but I'm not going to forget it. I'm not going to let you back in. Or if you stop drinking, we can consider it. I'm not going to forget. You can have boundaries. Being honest with yourself and letting go are two different things. Being honest with yourself and letting go, is different than denial. Let me tell you what that means. Early on in the process, this is not everybody goes through this kind of curve, but early on in the process of working with parents of a child who's struggling, it's not uncommon for them to say, I was in denial. I didn't see it. I wasn't honest with myself. And so we say, okay, and so they kind of ramp up their awareness, their self-honesty, and their boundaries. Right? Later in the process, months or years later, they might say, I know he may be drinking, and I can't control that, so I'm not gonna. He's 18 or 19 or 21, so I'm not gonna monitor that. Or I know he might be smoking, or I know that. I'm not gonna spend my time obsessing about or playing detective about whether he is or he isn't, or she is or she isn't. And I'm gonna let go of that. But that's not denial. That's letting go of what you cannot control. If he shows up drunk, he's not welcome here. If she yells at me, I'm going to excuse myself. But I'm not going to make my obsession what they're doing or not. Now, the younger they are, the more we're going to obviously have exposure to it and watch it. But I just want to say being honest with yourself and letting go looks the same as denial, but it's not. Is your lack of forgetting a mask for not forgiving? Right? We confuse the two. We remain angry. We stay in the hurt. We don't heal, and there's no timeline for healing. You take as long as you need. But sometimes we conflate the two, forgetting and forgiving. Like I said, making it about you. I've gotten better. I'm not denying being offended. I'm not ignoring myself and my feelings. It just doesn't hurt as much as it used to because my differentiation is higher. And when somebody says or does something to me, I know it's not about me. It's like the Four Agreements, the book, The Four Agreements. I think it's the third one, second or third one. Don't take it personally. The more differentiated you are, the more you realize this truism that what you tell me about the devil tells me more about you than it does about the devil. And so you're not ignoring or repressing the hurt. It doesn't hurt, it goes right through you. That's what this work allows you to do. And again, not robbing you of your boundaries. In fact, it only comes from having boundaries and healthy self-care. Learning to take care of yourself. Here's the simple thing. I can't say it any plainer than this. And I can say this because I live it. The best thing you can do for your child is your work. There's no greater contribution to your child's well-being that you can make, than your work. What is your work? It's going to therapy. It's going to an intensive. It's exploring yourself. Looking at your family of origin. Your wounds, your defenses. Take care of yourself. Do battle with the only thing you really have any power over anyway, which is you. Regression. When you think about regression, people ask me about that all the time. What about regression? Just worry about yours first. Worry about your regression first. I had a father, I've told this story before, and I think it's just amazingly, it's illuminating to me. His son had come to me and then he had gone home. Not against my strong recommendations, but I thought there was some risk, and I was ready to support him. And I talked to him several times after he went home. They'd hired me to kind of do some follow-up care. So 6 or 7 times. And over a period of months, the son had basically violated all of the behavioral contract, the things he had signed. He had the same excuses about the behavioral contract that all people who sign it have. Signing a behavioral contract doesn't release you from having to do your work. Hopefully, it just gives you confidence to be able to do it. So he said to me, the father said to me on one of my phone calls, he said, you know what? The other day, he did something that he knew was a potential trigger. I can't remember if it was drugs or what it was. He knew was a potential trigger for me to send him back to Wilderness or to an aftercare program. So and then the dad said to me, Brad, I know I'm not supposed to do this, but I went upstairs and I yelled at my son and I asked him, why did you do the thing that you know you're not supposed to do? And I said, let's just take a moment and pick that apart. So what you're telling me is you knew you weren't supposed to do it and you did it. And then you went up and asked your son, why did you do the thing you knew you weren't supposed to do? And I said, you kind of already know the answer, don't you? Just go back and tell him you're sorry and tell him you get it. Tell him you were doing the same thing he was doing. Just worry about your regression first and foremost. That's the most important thing. I had a mother who called me one time. They were visiting after Wilderness and after therapeutic boarding school. They were visiting colleges during one of the home visits. And the son was talking about comparing a few different colleges. And one was a lot more prestigious and took a lot more work. And one, I think if I remember, was really casual, probably had a culture that was involved in partying a little bit more. And the son was sharing with his mother how he had some preferences for the more casual party-like school. She said, Brad, I wasn't happy that he was saying that because that felt like to her like regression. But what I want to tell you, that's not why I'm calling you. I'm calling you to tell you that I handled it better than I would have a year ago. And I said, this is my favorite call. I don't mind hearing stories of your children and how they're doing. That's important. That's your story. It's real. I'm a safe person to tell it to. What I really, really respect, what I really, really admire is when you can say, that's his story, but this is how I'm dealing with it now. Well or not, because that's the only thing you have control over. Be very wary of we're back at square one. We're back to the beginning. You're not. You can't be, ever. And that kind of black and white thinking is triggering, right? Parents that have identified themselves in our research as successful say that this is the number one thing that they don't do, and that is communicate in black and white thinking. And then learning to value the mistakes and the struggles, like I said early on. Unfortunately, I wish it were different, but I've learned far more from my mistakes than I have from my successes. Far more. And I think that's true of most of us. I think it's true of most of your children, if not all of them. So it doesn't mean you don't steer away or have boundaries around it or consequences or limits. It just means that you have a different feeling towards it than you did before, because you've reframed the struggle, the detour as part of the journey. So what are the take-homes? Boundaries are about managing self-care, not about changing other people, although they do impact and change other people. But it's about making sure that you're living in accordance with your values. Resentment and anger are often signs of poor self-care. Owning your feelings, your trust, and your forgiveness is the thing. They're yours to give, and you choose. And nobody gets to decide when it's the right time, and it's okay. Knowing what you need to know. In other words, when I teach you all of this stuff, what I would say to you, and I'm being kind of silly about it, is don't ever tell them anything I've said to you. It's not for them. Don't repeat me to them. Just internalize it. This is what you need to know to be able to show up and parent with a secure attachment style, a healthy self, and a healthy connection. That's what this is for. But we want to tell them, because if we can change them, convince them, then we don't have to set boundaries, which is the hardest work of all. Slow down the process. Take your time. No hurry. Don't have to decide. Don't have to conclude everything today. And if you're unsure, stay unsure. Let go of what they think of you so that you can live your truth. And conversely, avoid trying to shame them and tell them how to feel or what not to feel. Try to convince them that you're right or that you only have their best interest at heart. That's not for them to hear from you. They get to decide how they feel. Release them and you from that dynamic. Be informed by what they say, but not controlled by it. Ask questions. Parents would say to me, can I ask him where he wants to go afterwards? I said, you can ask him anything. Can I ask her what she thinks structure at home should look like? And I say, absolutely. That's going to give you a lot of information. So you ask questions, absolutely. But that's not akin to abdicating responsibility that you get to decide your boundaries. That's not giving them an equal vote necessarily. That's not a mandate for you to do what they ask for, but you listen to learn about them. And then you ask yourself questions. And you talk with the adults in your life. And you come to a conclusion. And then get help. Work with people. You can't do this alone. You didn't end up this way alone with the wounds that you have. You did not end up this way with the wounds that you have. So the way out of it isn't alone. It doesn't work that way. Like I said last night, reading a self-help book, listening to a podcast, absolutely helpful. I do that too. It's not the same as therapy. Therapy is an experience that can't be replicated very easily. It is taking the risk to show up, tell the truth, show up as a mess, neurotic, whatever it is, at the risk that the therapist is going to respond like people in your past have And hopefully, if you have an adequate one, they'll respond with compassion and curiosity and understanding, and you'll find yourself over time. And that makes all the difference in the world. All right, send in questions now, and then I'll go through the upcoming information, and then we will go to the questions. We ask all current parents to go to 6 12-step support groups while their child is with us. Any combination of Al-Anon, CODA, Families Anonymous, Alateen is for teenagers if you have siblings that want to go, or adult children of alcoholics can be a great place to go to listen to if you had some of those characteristics in your family, even if there was no drinking. RefugeRecovery.org is a place you can go to learn about a Buddhist-inspired recovery program that many people are finding helpful. It doesn't have quite the emphasis on the higher power, if that's a barrier for you. A lot of mindfulness training. The National Alliance on Mental Illness, NAMI.org, is a great place to go for community resources, classes in your area that are affordable or free. On social media, you can listen to all of these broadcasts on your iPhone or iOS device on the podcast app. On an Android device, download the SoundCloud app. And on either device, just search when you get there, Evoke Therapy Programs, and then press subscribe. We try to release one the next morning after these broadcasts, sometime around 10:30. You can share those with friends. Those are available to the public. Please do share. Please rate us there and share them with friends if you find them helpful. On Twitter and Instagram, follow us using the handle @EvokeTherapy. And also, we have a new Instagram account for our intensive program, and it's called Evoke Summit Lodge. So follow us on Instagram there @Evoke Summit Lodge. Those are different accounts, they have different administrators, and both have wonderful themes. On Facebook, you can find us by searching Evoke Therapy Programs, or you can find the Alumni Foundation on Facebook by searching Evoke Family Foundation. Our Evoke blog has new information each week uploaded. My book is available on Amazon. Right now, while the warehouse is reprinting, just click on where it says new underneath the paperback. You can buy it directly from Evoke Therapy Programs. There's also electronic versions there and on your iBooks on your iOS device, or audio versions on Audible. Our next Finding You, if you want to do deeper work, our next opportunity is March 27th through 31st. 4.5 days, a deep dive, healing, awareness. I've done this. I do one of these every year for myself. I've done many myself. My children, my wife have done one. I believe them. We pay for our therapists to do them. We support them doing them. My business partners do them. We all believe in them. And we do them somewhere else because we don't do them at our own program. Email intensives@evoketherapy.com for more information. I will be in Southern California this Sunday from noon to 3. In the Bay Area next Thursday from 6:30 to 8:30, and in New York, Monday, March 18th, 7 to 9. Email Melanie@evoketherapy.com for more information, or to RSVP. If we ask all current parents to go to a workshop, multifamily, experiential, psychoeducational, wonderful. Parents rave about them. They're not mandatory, but we strongly encourage you to come. The next one is March 23rd at our Southern Utah program. Contact Melanie@evoketherapy.com for more information. Pursuit trips are for young adults or families anywhere in the world, any activity in the world. Think therapy fun, short-term 3 to 14-day trips to reconnect to your therapy or to have sober fun. All right, happy to take any live questions. First one comes in. How do you respond to your son or daughter who says, you wasted your money after 15 months in an RTC? You have not changed, and I am the same. Of course, that's not true. It was the worst, and you destroyed my social life. I do not expect appreciation or apologies, but I want to do the very best for my children. Well, what I would say is I would say sorry. I did the best, and maybe it was a mistake. In New York City 2 months ago, the parents first asked my son that question because he was there, and I sent him when he was 13 and 14. And then after he left, we talked about it. And they asked him the question, did you have anger? Did you resent your father? And after he left, I explained to them, I said, it wouldn't have mattered to me. Not that I don't love my children, because I love them as much as I'm capable of loving anybody. But it wouldn't have mattered to me. My response would be, maybe I was wrong. Sorry. And when you take that approach, they can move through it. If I have an investment in them not being angry, if I need you to not be angry, then we're going to stay stuck and it's hard to move through. So the response is, sorry. Sounds like it was really horrible. Did the best that I could. Maybe it was a mistake. That's the best way you can encourage them moving through it. But if you have an agenda where you need them to get through it at all, ever, it's lost. My children don't really resent me because, not because I don't mess up, because I mess up a lot every day, but because I don't care if they do. It's not a value of mine. They're allowed to hate me and be hurt by me. And it takes a lot of work to get there. And so we just kind of move through it. I do stupid stuff. I try to say I'm sorry. They tell me what an idiot I am. And then I agree with them. I admire where you indicate that home contracts are not workable. This is true. I have found that being present, not efficient, is the best position for developing trust, permission, forgiveness, and forgetting. This means driving, kids' activities, laundry, homework, encouragement, dinner. Time matters. Time is a big deal. In middle to upper class families, children ask for more time. In lower class families, money is seen as love and sacrifice. In middle and upper class families, it's time. Right? It's whichever is the most scarce resource. And about behavioral contracts, I'm not anti, but I'm pretty close to anti-behavioral contracts. Because in the history of parenting, no child who's ever signed a contract, when confronted with the violation of that contract and its associated consequence, no child in human history has ever said to the parent, you know what, you're right. I see right here on the piece of paper very clearly, I violated the terms of our agreement. I see my signature at the bottom of the page, and I accept the consequence willingly. Never happened. The only reason you do it would be just as helpful if you wrote a contract yourself and never showed it to the kid, but knew where your boundaries were. It's only a helpful tool to help you become clear, but we want them to be okay with it. We want to say, see, I have evidence here that you agreed to it. First of all, they'll say, I agreed to it under duress, I had no choice, or they'll bring up one of any number of loopholes. So use a behavioral contract, but not to enforce it, but to give you clarity and confidence and following through on the difficult task of setting, holding, and following through on a boundary. You've mentioned a daily mindfulness video that's available at 6 a.m. each day and for 24 hours. Would you please tell us where to find it? It's available on Mondays. It's Mindful Mondays. So it's Mindful Mondays. I believe it's 6:30 a.m. Go to your Instagram account and follow at Evoke Summit Lodge. And you'll see announcements. It's really cool content. It's really cool content at the Evoke Summit Lodge. So yeah, check that out. Do you have a list of therapists that understand these issues you discuss and that approach the therapeutic process the way you describe? There are so many therapists, but not all of them have this well-rounded view of therapy. I don't have a list. I wish there were more. I have an article on my website, my personal website, I think it is, drbradreedy.com, that talks about how to choose a therapist. I should do another broadcast on working with a therapist to ask for what you need and seeing. I will do that someday soon. Okay. Attachment theory is what I'm talking about. Analysis, psychodynamic theory is what I'm talking about. Check this out. Just think about this. People talk about analysis, right? Think about analysis. What do you think of analysis? You imagine some cold, formal guy sitting in a chair behind somebody on a couch like Sigmund Freud taking notes. Cold, distant, professional. But think about this. A typical course of analysis would last anywhere from 6 to 10 years. And during those 6 to 10 years, the client or patient comes back 2 to 3 times a week. Imagine going to somebody 3 times a week for 10 years, Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, or Tuesday and Thursday, and saying the same thing over and over and over again. And the therapist tolerating it, the analyst tolerating it, listening, understanding, reflecting back compassion, and non-judgment. That's analysis. I teach and train therapists all the time, and most of them don't know what it is. They think therapy is problem solving. I wrote a professional article in a journal a couple of years ago on this. If you Google my name, Brad Reedy, and you Google NATSAP, NATSAP, and therapy and psychology. That's the name of the article. Psychology versus therapy. Most therapists think it's problem solving, it's skill building. Those kinds of things do happen in therapy. But therapy is supposed to be another context. Therapy is supposed to be a healing thing. And if the therapist's agenda takes the forefront, if I'm taking care of my needs in therapy, it's not therapy. I have parents for that. The deal in therapy is you hand me a check for my time, end of deal. That's all that I require of you. If you want to talk about sports for 10 years, we talk about sports for 10 years. A famous analyst had a client come to him and he said, an adult, my family thinks I need to go to a therapist. My wife thinks I need to go to a therapist. My friend thinks I need to go to a therapist. And the therapist says, what do you think? And he said, I don't know. I want to become a director. So the analyst says, let's talk about that then. See, I just see you. That's the deal. So it's not very common. I'm sorry. But if you look at that article I wrote on psychology versus therapy, Brad Reedy, NATSAP, NATSAP, you can find the article there. If you want to email me at brad@evoketherapy.com, want a copy of it, share it with your therapist, share my book with them, see what they think. If this feels right to you, and see if they're willing to meet you there. Can you discuss what vulnerability means? Vulnerability is the quality or the experience of taking a risk, of showing up to some degree of honesty at the risk that you're going to be hurt, judged, rejected, disliked, corrected, fixed, right? Vulnerability is the risk that I take. If I tell you the truth about how I feel, I can get hurt. I just had an experience just the other day where in an experience of training, I came to an awareness of something that I thought and felt that I felt ashamed of. And I thought, I'm going to say that because this is a safe room. And I said, hey, I have this feeling and this thought, and I'm embarrassed of it. I feel horrible as a father to think and feel this way. And saying it out loud, I'm afraid everybody in the room is going to judge me. Nobody did. I knew it was a safe place. But that's vulnerability. It's saying, I don't know. I'm scared. I'm hurt. Your children, if you want your children to be vulnerable, to let down their walls, the walls they built to protect them from perceived threats, then you let down your wall first. That's how it works. Then you don't pose a threat. Can wilderness help teens that appear to have early personality disorders such as histrionic or narcissistic, or might it be too much? Absolutely. It's a longer project for all of our teens. But that's what we do, right? Narcissism comes from the narcissistic wound. That's where it comes from. And you can heal wounds. Personality disorders are famous for being more difficult to treat and become more kind of a theme throughout your life. But that's my specialty, actually, is working in personality disorders. Because when you do that, everything else is easy, right? So absolutely, I wrote an article on my website on what narcissism really is. drbradreedy.com. Go to the blog page, scroll down. I only have about 10 or 15 blogs there, and it's called What Really is Narcissism. And it's not what you think. And the way that the typical person and even the therapist might react to it is not helpful. It looks arrogant, and it is. That's how it presents. But it's something quite different underneath. So absolutely. All right, no further questions. Thank you, folks. I enjoyed talking to you tonight. I love this work. I hope these are helpful for you. They're helpful. Excuse me. I hope they're helpful contact and points during the week for you to refer to. I hope it's helpful for you to listen to them. Again, please rate us on the podcast app and the SoundCloud app, and share us with your friends and on social media, and get this message out, because it can make a world of difference. Thank you for and on behalf of your children for showing up to these. This is what they need from you. They don't need perfection. They just need you to change the project from trying to fix them to trying to fix you. They need you to change that focus. I have a week's vacation and a lot of work next week with travel. So for back-to-back weeks, I'm going to be unavailable. So I'm doing something new. My next broadcast is going to be on a Saturday. You don't have to attend it live, of course, but it's going to be on a Saturday, March 2nd at 1 p.m. Mountain Time. And that's right before my vacation, in between work travel and my vacation. So Saturday, March 2nd, 1 p.m. Mountain Time, and it's going to be on codependency and co-participation. I look back and listen to the recording I did a few years ago on it, and I want to update the recording and the message. Thanks for joining us. Have a great couple of weeks, and I'll talk to you on the 2nd. Bye-bye.